It was a warm Friday evening in Washington, D.C., and the city had that familiar hum of life that came when the week was winding down. The streets were filled with people walking, laughing, and taking in the soft glow of the streetlights. Malia Obama had been out with a few close friends, quietly enjoying her evening at a small cafe tucked between two busy streets. She had chosen the spot because it wasn't one of those fancy, high-profile places. It was cozy, ordinary, and peaceful. Exactly what she wanted. Malia had grown used to people looking at her, but tonight she was just another young woman enjoying a break after a long week. Her friends chatted about movies, plans, and everyday things. There was something comforting about being able to laugh about simple stuff. For once, no cameras, no interviews, no heavy expectations, just a night out. After an hour or so, they decided to head home. The streets were quieting down, though a few cars still rolled by. Malia walked toward her parked car, her phone in hand, smiling at a message from her sister. She didn't notice the patrol car slowing down nearby at first. The flashing lights didn't come until she was already unlocking her door. Then she saw the red and blue reflections sweep over the glass, and she froze for a second. At first, she thought it might just be a routine check. Maybe they were pulling someone else over. But then one of the officers stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the dim light, and she realized he was walking straight toward her. "Excuse me, miss," the officer said, his tone brisk. "Can you step away from the vehicle for a moment?" Malia blinked, caught off guard. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked politely. "We'll get to that," he replied, glancing over her car. "Can I see your ID?" She reached for her bag and took out her wallet, her movements calm and steady. "Sure," she said, handing it over. The officer took it and looked at it for only a second before frowning slightly. "This yours?" he asked, his tone doubtful. "Yes, it is," Malia said, a little confused. The second officer, standing by the car, circled around slowly. "This car matched the description of a vehicle involved in a hit-and-run earlier tonight," he said. "Mind telling us where you've been?" "I was just at the cafe down the street," she said, pointing toward it. "You can ask anyone there." The first officer exchanged a look with his partner. "We'll see about that," he said. "In the meantime, keep your hands where I can see them." Malia's heart started to beat a little faster. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Growing up as the daughter of Barack and Michelle Obama, she had always been taught to treat others with respect and remain calm under pressure. And she did. But there was something about the officer's tone that made her uneasy. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she could feel the disbelief in his voice. "Officer," she said softly, "there must be some misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong." "We'll be the judge of that," he said. People walking by began to slow down, sensing tension in the air. A couple across the street stopped to watch. The lights from the police car painted the sidewalk in flashes of red and blue. Malia felt the weight of the attention, the whispers. Her friends had already stepped closer, one of them trying to speak up. "Sir, she hasn't done anything." "Step back," the second officer snapped. "This doesn't concern you." The friend stepped back immediately, her hands raised in surrender. Malia swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "You can run my name if you want," she said carefully. "I'm sure there's been a mix-up." "Oh, we'll run it," the officer said, still looking skeptical. "But we're going to need to search your vehicle first." "Search my car?" Malia repeated. "Why?" "Routine procedure," he said, though his tone made it sound more like an order than a request. Malia hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to not argue. Her father had always told her, "Stay respectful, stay composed. Don't give them a reason to escalate." So she did. She took a slow breath and said, "I understand, but I'd prefer if you didn't. I haven't done anything wrong." That only seemed to irritate him. "Are you refusing to cooperate?" "No, I'm not refusing," she said quickly. "I'm just saying I didn't break any law." The officer looked at her for a long moment, then smirked slightly. "All right then," he said. "We'll handle it our way." He stepped back and started talking into his radio. Malia could hear him describing her car, her name, and the supposed match with another vehicle. She stood still, her pulse quickening. Her friends whispered nervously among themselves. One of them pulled out her phone. Not to record, but to call someone. Probably the Secret Service contact that still discreetly kept tabs on Malia and her family. The second officer began peering into her car window with his flashlight, muttering under his breath, You say this is your car? Yes, she said. It's registered in my name, he scoffed. We'll see. Malia tried to stay patient, but the longer it went on, the more humiliating it became. She could feel the stares of strangers, the murmurs in the background. Someone across the street had started recording on their phone. She didn't want a scene, but it was too late for that. The first officer came back, glancing at her ID again. So you're telling me you're Malia Obama? He said, raising an eyebrow. Yes, she said softly. He laughed under his breath, clearly not believing her. That's a good one, he said. And I'm the Queen of England. Her lips parted slightly in shock. She wanted to explain, to show some proof, but she knew that any sign of frustration might make things worse. So she took another breath, forcing herself to stay composed. I'm not trying to make this difficult, she said. I just want to go home. Well, if you're really who you say you are, he said mockingly, I guess the Secret Service will come rescue you any second now, right? His partner chuckled at the remark, and Malia felt her face flush. Not from anger, though she had every reason to be, but from disbelief that she was being treated like this for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Minutes dragged by. The radio crackled, but no confirmation came through. Her friends were getting anxious. One of them whispered, This is ridiculous. They don't even know who they're talking to. Malia shook her head slightly. It's okay, she said quietly. Let's just wait. Inside, though, she was unsettled. Her whole life, she'd been told she'd have to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. Even with her name, even with her background. But this moment reminded her of something deeper. It wasn't just about who she was. It was about how easily some people dismissed others based on what they saw in front of them. The second officer tapped on the window again, shining the light directly into the car. Nothing here, he muttered, then turned back to his partner. Maybe she's telling the truth, but the first officer wasn't ready to back down. We'll see what dispatch says, he replied, folding his arms. Another minute passed. Then another. The city around them moved on, but the small crowd nearby grew. Some whispered that it was Malia Obama. Others laughed, not believing it. Finally, one of the officers' radios crackled again. Dispatch to Unit 3, we've got a possible confirmation. The rest was muffled by static, but both men leaned in to listen. Their faces changed, subtly at first, then more noticeably. What did you say? The first officer asked into his mic. Repeat that. The voice on the other end came through more clearly this time. Confirmed. That's Malia Obama, daughter of former President Barack Obama. Stand by. The silence that followed was heavy. The two officers looked at each other, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. Malia didn't say anything. She just stood there watching their sudden discomfort. The first officer cleared his throat. Miss Obama, he said, his tone completely different now. Sorry for the confusion. We were just following up on a report. Malia looked at him calmly. I understand, she said. He forced a weak smile. You can go ahead and be on your way. Sorry for the inconvenience, she nodded, not saying much else. The moment was too raw, too absurd to process right away. She just wanted to leave quietly. Her friends stayed silent, sensing that she needed space. As she got into her car, the same officer who had mocked her earlier tried to add, just routine procedure. No hard feelings. Malia gave him a polite nod, though her eyes said otherwise. Then she started the car and drove away slowly, the flashing lights fading in her rearview mirror. Inside the car, her friends sat quietly at first. Then one of them whispered, That was unbelievable. Malia didn't respond immediately. She was still trying to make sense of it. The humiliation wasn't something she could just shrug off. Even after all these years, moments like that still found her. Moments that reminded her that no amount of fame, education, or upbringing could fully protect her from being misjudged. She took a deep breath and said, It's fine. Let's just go home. But deep down, she knew it wasn't fine. As they drove through the calm streets, her phone buzzed. A text popped up from one of her father's security contacts. We heard what happened. Are you okay? She stared at it for a second, then typed back, I'm okay, just a misunderstanding. But the truth was, she didn't feel okay. The lights, the looks, the disbelief, it all lingered. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, and maybe it wouldn't be the last. But something about this night stung more than usual. She thought about how her father would react if he knew. He would be calm, measured, and understanding, but she also knew it would worry him. He'd always tried to protect his daughters from the harsher parts of the world. Still, he had raised them to face life with dignity no matter what. As she turned onto the quiet road leading home, Malia glanced once more into the rearview mirror. The flashing lights were gone, but the feeling stayed. She exhaled slowly and focused on the road ahead, determined not to let one moment define her night. Somewhere in the city, though, those two officers were still standing by their patrol car, trying to process what had just happened. One of them rubbed his forehead, muttering, "Man, that was the president's kid." The other one didn't answer. He just looked down, the weight of realization settling over him. He'd laughed at her, doubted her, treated her like she didn't matter, and now he couldn't take it back. Malia didn't see their regret, and maybe she didn't need to. She'd learned long ago that respect shouldn't depend on someone's name or power. It should come naturally from one human being to another. That night, as she finally reached home and parked in the driveway, she sat for a while before going inside. The world outside had gone quiet again, but inside her something was still restless. She wasn't angry, not exactly. Just tired of proving herself, tired of being doubted. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and reminded herself of something her mother used to say. "When they go low, we go high." It wasn't easy, but it was what she'd been raised to do, and so she did what she always did, lifted her chin, stepped out of the car and walked inside, letting the night fade behind her. Malia woke up the next morning with the events of the night still fresh in her mind. The sunlight came through the curtains, soft and golden, but she didn't feel the warmth of it. Her thoughts kept circling back to the flashing lights, the skeptical faces, and the tone in the officer's voice when he doubted her identity. She sat on the edge of her bed for a while, staring at her phone on the nightstand. A few unread messages blinked on the screen, friends checking in, her sister asking how she was, and one from her dad's security aide saying, "President Obama would like to speak with you when you're ready." She knew he must have already heard what happened. There were probably photos online, maybe even short videos. Everything spread fast these days. Malia sighed, grabbed her phone, and typed a quick message to her dad. "I'm okay. Can we talk later?" After a moment, he replied, "Of course, sweetheart. Whenever you're ready." That was how he always was, patient, calm, never pushing. But she knew he was worried. She got up, showered, and made herself some tea. The quiet of the kitchen was comforting. For a moment, she let herself pretend it was just another morning, but when she checked her phone again, her name was already trending online. Someone had posted a short clip of the incident, and comments were pouring in. Most people were outraged, calling it unfair, humiliating, and disrespectful. Others questioned if it was really her. Some even said the officers didn't mean harm and were just doing their jobs. Malia put the phone face down on the table. It was exhausting reading those things, seeing people debate her experience as if it were just another piece of entertainment. Her mom called later that morning. "Hey, baby," Michelle's voice came through softly, full of concern. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, Mom," Malia said automatically, though she didn't sound convincing. Michelle paused. "You don't sound fine. Do you want to talk about it?" Malia hesitated. I don't get why it happened. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But the way they looked at me, like I couldn't possibly be telling the truth." Her mom sighed. "I know, sweetheart. I wish I could tell you it doesn't happen, but sometimes people see what they want to see, not what's in front of them." "I stayed calm," Malia said. "I didn't argue. I did everything right." "I know you did," her mom said gently, "and I'm proud of you for that. You handled yourself with grace." "Grace doesn't change how it felt," Malia said softly. Michelle was quiet for a moment. "No, it doesn't. But how you carry yourself afterward in Gaum, that's where your strength shows." After the call, Malia sat for a long while, sipping her tea and staring out the window. She wasn't angry exactly. It was something else. A heavy kind of sadness that came when you realized how quickly people could strip away your dignity without even realizing it. Later that day, her dad asked if she'd like to come over for dinner. She agreed. Maybe it would help to talk face to face. When she arrived at her parents' home that evening, the house felt as warm and familiar as ever. The scent of home-cooked food filled the air, and her father greeted her at the door with his usual gentle smile. "Hey, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a hug. For a second, the world felt okay again. but as they sat down in the living room, she could tell he was troubled. There was a seriousness in his eyes, that same look he used to have back in the White House whenever something was weighing heavily on him. "I saw the video," he said softly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Malia nodded. "It was embarrassing, Dad. They didn't believe me. One of them even laughed when I said my name." Her dad sighed deeply, his hand resting on his chin. "People make assumptions too easily," he said. "They forget that respect shouldn't depend on who someone is and or who their parents are." "I know," she said. "But it's hard not to feel small when it happens." He looked at her with empathy. "You handled it better than most people would have. You stayed calm, and that's something to be proud of." "I didn't even know what to say," she admitted. "Part of me wanted to tell them off, but I just froze." "That's natural," he said. "You're not supposed to know what to do when someone treats you unfairly. You just did what you could." They sat quietly for a moment. Malia could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound oddly grounding. Then Barack spoke again. "I've already received a call about the situation," he said. "The department knows what happened. They're looking into it." Malia looked surprised. "I didn't want it to become a big deal." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes things become big deals whether we want them to or not. What matters is how we respond." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. "I just wanted a normal night." "I know," he said softly. "You deserve that." They ate dinner together, simple food, comfort food. Her mother joined in later, and the three of them talked about small things. Family, memories, even jokes about how Sasha was probably laughing at all the drama online. But underneath the laughter, there was still tension. After dinner, her father said quietly, "You know, this could become an important conversation. Not just for us, but for a lot of people watching." Malia frowned. "I don't want attention from it." "I get that," he said. "But sometimes the things we don't want to talk about are the ones that need to be said." She didn't answer right away. The idea of speaking publicly about it made her uneasy. It wasn't about fame or politics. She just didn't want people to think she was trying to make herself a victim. Her father seemed to read her thoughts. "You don't have to make a statement. Just think about it. If you tell your story, someone else out there might feel less alone." Malia nodded slowly. She understood what he meant, but she wasn't ready yet. That night, when she got home, her mind kept replaying everything. The flashing lights, the disbelief in the officer's eyes, the laughter. She knew that if she didn't face it soon, it would sit inside her like a stone. She picked up her journal and started to write. Not for the public, not for the press, but for herself. She wrote about how helpless she felt, how she wanted to believe the world was better than that, how tired she was of having to prove her worth over and over again. The words poured out until her hand hurt, and when she finished, she felt a little lighter. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and headlines. News outlets ran stories about the incident involving Malia Obama. Commentators debated whether the officers were wrong. Some people defended them, saying it was just a misunderstanding. Others said it was a sign of something deeper, a reminder of how easily prejudice could hide behind authority. Malia tried to ignore most of it. She went for walks, stayed off social media, and spent time with close friends who knew how to make her laugh again. But the world didn't forget quickly. The video kept circulating, and the pressure for her to say something grew louder. One evening, her father called again. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," she said. "Just trying not to think about it too much." "I know that trick," he said with a chuckle. "It doesn't work for long." She smiled faintly. "Yeah, maybe not." He paused for a moment. "The police chief wants to meet you," he said finally. "They're conducting an internal review. You don't have to go if you don't want to." Malia was quiet for a long time. "Would it even make a difference?" "I think it might," he said gently. "Not just for them, for you too." She thought about it that night. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to see anyone fired or punished. She just wanted acknowledgement, a moment of truth. A few days later, she agreed to the meeting. It took place in a quiet conference room at the police department. The atmosphere was stiff, professional, and slightly uncomfortable. The two officers were there, along with the police chief and a few others. When Malia walked in, everyone stood. She could feel the tension, the guilt, the awkwardness. The officers looked nervous, their eyes downcast. The chief began by thanking her for coming. Then he said, "Miss Obama, we want to sincerely apologize for the way you were treated that night. It was unprofessional and it should not have happened. Malia nodded slightly, listening. One of the officers, the one who had mocked her, cleared his throat. I just want to say, I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you and I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just doing my job, but I should have handled it differently. She looked at him quietly. You didn't have to know who I was to treat me with respect, she said softly. The words hung in the air. The room went still. The officer looked down, clearly ashamed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even bitter. She just wanted them to understand. The meeting ended with another round of apologies. As she left, Malia felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. It hadn't erased what happened, but it gave her a sense of closure. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. Reporters were waiting by the gate, cameras ready, shouting questions. Malia, how do you feel about the apology? Do you forgive them? She stopped briefly, looked at the crowd and said simply, I believe in learning from mistakes. That's all. Then she got into her car and left. That night, she received another call, and this time from her father. I saw the footage, he said. You handled it perfectly. I just said what I felt, she replied. That's what makes it powerful, he said. She smiled a little. Thanks, Dad. Proud of you always, he said before hanging up. For the first time since that night, Malia felt at peace. She knew the story would fade from headlines soon, replaced by something else. But for her, it would always be more than a headline. It was a moment of truth, not just about others, but about herself. She realized that strength wasn't about fighting every battle. Sometimes it was about walking through the storm quietly, keeping your dignity intact, and knowing who you are even when others don't. And as she turned off the lights and lay down to sleep, she thought of her dad's words. What matters is how we respond. She had responded with grace, and that she knew was enough. The days that followed were calmer, but the story hadn't completely disappeared. News outlets had begun to move on, but the clip still lingered on social media. People kept reposting it, discussing it, dissecting it. Some were still angry, some were defending the officers, and others were just curious. Malia had learned to tune it out. She focused on her classes, her friends, and the small routines that made life normal again. Yet there were moments when the memory came back uninvited. A flashing light in the distance, a sharp tone in someone's voice, or even a random conversation about police encounters. All of it brought a quiet wave of unease that she didn't talk about. She told herself she was fine. She told her parents she was fine. But deep down, something about that night had changed her view of the world. Not in a dramatic way, just in a subtle, unsettling one. One evening, she was walking home after a long day at the university library. The streetlights flickered softly, and the air had that cool early spring chill. She stopped at a small grocery store to pick up a few things, and when she came out, she noticed a man sitting on a bench near the corner. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him at first. Then it clicked. It was one of the officers from that night, the younger one, the one who had circled her car with the flashlight. For a moment, she froze. She wasn't sure whether to walk past him or turn around. But before she could decide, he noticed her and stood up. Miss Obama, he said quietly, his voice low and unsure. She stopped, hesitating. Hello, she said politely. He took a step closer, though not too close. I wasn't expecting to see you, he said. I've been meaning to apologize again. The other day I was thinking about everything that happened and... He paused, rubbing his hands together. It's been bothering me. Malia wasn't sure what to say. She didn't want to make a scene. The street was quiet, with only a few people passing by. It's all right, she said finally. I already accepted your apology. He nodded, but his expression was troubled. I know, but I realized it wasn't enough. That night I didn't see you as a person. I just saw a situation, and I think that's what's wrong with how we do things sometimes. His words caught her off guard. They sounded genuine, not rehearsed, not official. She softened slightly. We all make mistakes, she said. What matters is that you learn from them. He nodded again. I did. That night, it changed the way I look at people. I've been in this job for years, and it's easy to forget that everyone you stop, everyone you question is a human being. But after that, I started thinking about how I'd want someone to treat my own family if they were in your place. Malia felt a small weight lift off her chest. It didn't erase what happened, but hearing him say that made it feel like something good had come out of it. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." He gave a small, respectful nod. "Take care, Miss Obama," he said before walking away. Malia stood there for a moment watching him leave. She hadn't expected to see him again, but somehow the encounter made her feel lighter. Maybe, she thought, people really could change if they wanted to. When she got home, she told her dad about it. He listened quietly, then smiled. "See," he said, "that's the power of how you handled it. You didn't fight back with anger. You gave him room to reflect. That's leadership even when you're not trying to lead." Malia laughed softly. "You always make everything sound like a speech," her dad chuckled. Old habits die hard. Later that night, Malia sat on her bed scrolling through her messages. There were dozens from people she didn't know, strangers from all over the country who had seen the story and wanted to thank her for staying calm, for showing grace, for reminding them to stay strong in the face of unfairness. She realized then that her father was right. Maybe this wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about everyone who had ever been misjudged or treated unfairly. Still, she didn't want to live in the spotlight. So she stayed quiet. She didn't give interviews or post statements. Instead, she started volunteering with a local community group that worked on building better relationships between young people and local police. It wasn't a headline-making move, just small steps. She attended workshops, listened to stories, and sometimes spoke to high school students about confidence and respect. She never brought up her own experience unless someone asked directly. One evening after one of these meetings, an older woman approached her. "You're Malia, right?" The woman said, her voice kind. "I just wanted to say my grandson saw your story online. He told me it made him want to be a police officer, but one who listens, not one who assumes." Malia smiled. "That's wonderful," she said. "Please tell him I said thank you." The woman nodded. "He said he wants to meet you someday." Malia laughed. "Maybe one day." As she drove home that night, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. Maybe she couldn't fix the system or change every unfair situation, but she could do something. Even if it was just inspiring one person to do better, that was enough. But the story wasn't over. One weekend, she received a message from her dad's assistant asking if she could stop by his office. "The chief of police wants to meet with you and your father together," the message said. At first, she hesitated. She thought she was done with all of it. But her father encouraged her. "It's not about reopening old wounds," he said. "It's about healing them properly." So she agreed. The meeting was arranged for the following Monday. When they arrived, several senior officers were there along with the chief. The atmosphere was respectful, almost solemn. The chief started by thanking Malia again for her patience and for the grace she had shown throughout the ordeal. "We've been conducting training sessions for our officers since the incident," the chief said. "We realized we needed to change how we approach certain situations." "You were right. Respect should never depend on recognition." Malia was touched. "I'm glad something positive came out of it," she said. Her father nodded in agreement. "We all make mistakes," he said. "The important thing is learning from them." After the meeting, as they walked outside together, the chief turned to Barack and said quietly, "Sir, when we first got that call that night, I'll admit I didn't believe it either. I didn't think it could really be your daughter. But seeing how it all unfolded, it was a lesson for all of us." Barack gave him a steady look and said, "Sometimes lessons come the hard way, but as long as we learn them, it's worth it." When they got to the car, Malia exhaled deeply. "That was harder than I thought it would be," she said. Her dad smiled. "Growth usually is." They drove in silence for a while before Malia said softly, "You know, I think I'm finally ready to talk about it publicly. Not for attention, but maybe to help people see what it feels like." Her dad looked at her proud. "If that's what you want to do, I'll support you." A few weeks later, Malia agreed to do a short interview with a well-known journalist. The tone wasn't dramatic or political, it was honest. She talked about how it felt to be doubted, about the quiet embarrassment, and about how she chose to stay calm instead of angry. "I don't want anyone to hate the police," she said during the interview. "I just want people to see each other as humans first." That night reminded me that even small moments of kindness or patience can change everything. The interview went viral, not because she was famous, but because her words struck a chord. People shared clips of her speaking, praising her for her honesty and humility. Her father watched the interview later that night. When it ended, he smiled quietly to himself. His daughter had found her own voice, not because of who he was, but because of who she had become. Meanwhile, across town, one of the officers from that night watched the same interview in his small apartment. He sat there for a long time afterward, thinking about her words. Then he turned off the TV, took a deep breath, and picked up his phone. He called his supervisor and said, "I want to help with the community training sessions. I think I can make a difference." Life moved on, but the ripple effect of that night continued. Months later, Malia was walking through a park when a group of high school students recognized her. They waved and called out to her. "You're the one from that story," one of them said. "You handled it so calmly. My teacher showed us your video in class." Malia smiled, amused. "Really?" "Yeah," another student said. "She said it's an example of how to stay strong when people treat you unfairly." Malia laughed softly. "I'm glad it helped." As she walked away, she realized something. The night that had started as one of her worst experiences had somehow turned into a moment that inspired others. And that was more powerful than anything she could have imagined. Later that evening, she met her father for dinner again. They sat outside enjoying the quiet hum of the city. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but not with anger anymore. More like gratitude. I learned a lot about people, and about myself." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's the best way to move forward." She looked at him and smiled. "You know, Dad, when you were president, I used to think your calmness was just practice. But now I understand it. Sometimes calm isn't weakness, it's strength." Her father smiled proudly. "Exactly." As the sun began to set, Malia looked around at the city she loved. The same streets that had once made her feel small now felt like a part of her story. Not perfect, but real. She knew she couldn't control what people thought or how they acted, but she could control her response. And that, she realized, was its own kind of power. The story that had once been about humiliation had turned into something entirely different. A quiet reminder that even in unfair moments, dignity could outshine anger, and empathy could open doors that force never could. And as the evening breeze brushed against her face, she smiled to herself, finally feeling free from the weight of that night. After the interview aired, life began to change for Malia in quiet but meaningful ways. People started approaching her not because of her famous last name, but because of how she had handled herself. They wanted to thank her, share their own stories, and sometimes just tell her that she had reminded them to stay calm when life was unfair. It was strange at first. She wasn't used to being looked at as someone who inspired others. She still saw herself as just a young woman trying to make sense of the world, learning as she went. But she began to understand that sometimes influence wasn't something you asked for. It was something that found you when you least expected it. One evening, she received an invitation to speak at a youth leadership conference in Chicago. The message said the event was about finding strength through adversity. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to speak publicly again. But her father encouraged her. "Sometimes," he told her over dinner, "when you speak from a place of truth, people listen in ways they don't expect. You don't need to have all the answers. Just share what's real." She nodded, thinking about it for a moment. "I'm not a motivational speaker," she said with a small smile. Her dad chuckled. "Neither was I at your age. You don't have to sound like one. Just be yourself." So she agreed. When she arrived in Chicago a few weeks later, she was surprised by how big the event was. Hundreds of young people filled the auditorium, some carrying notebooks, others holding their phones ready to record. She felt nervous, not because of the crowd, but because she wanted to say something that actually mattered. When it was her turn to speak, she walked up to the stage, took a deep breath, and looked out at the audience. "Hi, everyone," she began with a gentle smile. "I don't have a fancy speech prepared. I just want to talk to you like a friend." The crowd quieted. She told them about that night, not in dramatic detail but honestly, about the confusion, the embarrassment, the disbelief, and how she chose to stay calm even when she was being treated unfairly. She told them about what she learned afterward, that people's actions often say more about their fears than about who you are. When someone doubts you, she said, you can choose to let it make you bitter, or you can let it make you stronger. Staying calm doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're in control of your own story. When she finished, there was silence for a moment. Then the audience stood up and began to applaud. Some even shouted words of encouragement. Malia smiled, feeling a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. She wasn't speaking as a public figure's daughter. She was speaking as herself. Afterward, a group of students came up to meet her. One young girl, maybe 15 or 16, looked especially nervous. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course," Malia said. The girl hesitated. "How do you stay calm when you know you're being treated unfairly?" "I always end up crying or getting angry." Malia smiled gently. "That's okay. You're human. It's not about never feeling angry. It's about what you do with that anger. Take a deep breath. Remind yourself who you are. Don't let someone else's behavior decide your worth." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to hear that." When Malia left the building that day, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Maybe everything that had happened had a purpose after all. But peace didn't mean everything went smoothly. There were still critics online. People who claimed she was using her family name to gain sympathy or that she was exaggerating what happened. She learned to ignore them. Her dad once told her, "If you spend your energy defending yourself against everyone, you'll never have time to build something of your own." So she focused on her goals. She threw herself into her studies and continued volunteering. Every month, she helped organize youth workshops about communication, empathy, and social awareness. Slowly, she began to see small changes in her community. Young people talking more openly about fairness, respect, and responsibility. One day, during a workshop, she saw a familiar face walk in. The same officer who had spoken to her months ago on the street, the one who'd apologized sincerely. He approached her after the session ended. "I've been working with some of your volunteers," he said. "We're starting a new program where officers visit schools to talk about trust and respect. I thought you might want to be part of it." Malia smiled. "That sounds like a great idea," he nodded. "I just thought it might help to show that people can learn from each other, even when things start off badly." "I'd like that," she said. The following month, they began visiting schools together. It was awkward at first, standing side by side after everything that had happened. But the students appreciated it. They could see that both sides were trying to understand each other. Malia didn't pretend everything was perfect, and the officer didn't pretend he'd done nothing wrong. Their honesty was what made the message real. After one of the sessions, a student asked, "Do you ever get tired of talking about that night?" Malia thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "but then I remember that if one person walks out of here with a new perspective, it's worth it." As the months passed, Malia noticed that her father seemed proud in a quiet way. He didn't say it often, but she could see it in his eyes whenever she talked about her work. One evening, they sat together on the porch of their family home, watching the sunset. The air was still, the sky painted with orange and purple hues. "You know," her dad said, "when I was younger, I thought strength meant raising your voice. But the older I got, the more I realized strength can also mean staying steady when everything else is shaking." Malia smiled softly. "You mean like staying calm?" He chuckled. "Exactly. I guess you learned that better than most." She looked at him fondly. "I think I learned it from you." He nodded slowly, looking out at the horizon. "You handled everything better than I ever could have hoped for. Not because you're my daughter, but because you showed people how to be better without pointing fingers." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thanks, Dad." He patted her shoulder gently. "You don't owe anyone anger. What you gave instead, grace, that's something this world needs more of." The conversation stayed with her for a long time. Weeks later, she was invited to attend a small community ceremony where the police department wanted to recognize citizens who had helped improve trust between officers and residents. She wasn't sure she wanted to go, but the same officer who had apologized urged her. "It's not about awards," he said. "It's about closure," so she went. When she arrived, she saw faces she recognized. Community leaders, youth mentors, even a few people who had criticized her before but now looked at her with quiet respect. The chief gave a short speech about progress and learning. Then he called Malia up to the stage. "We'd like to recognize Miss Obama," he said, "for showing courage, restraint, and compassion when it mattered most. Her actions sparked changes that continue to grow in our community. As the audience applauded, Malia felt overwhelmed. She wasn't sure she deserved an award for just staying calm, but she accepted it with a grateful heart. After the ceremony, the officer she had once feared approached her again. "You know," he said with a small smile, "you changed more than you realize." She shook her head lightly. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," he said. "You reminded us what respect really looks like." That night, Malia sat in her car for a while before driving home. She looked at the small plaque in her lap, a simple token, but it meant more than any headline or speech. It represented the power of staying composed in a world that often confused loudness with strength. When she finally got home, her father was waiting up for her. "How did it go?" he asked. "It went well," she said, showing him the plaque. He smiled. "You see? I told you. Good things grow out of hard moments." She laughed softly. "You always say that." "That's because it's true," he replied. They talked for a while before Malia said quietly, "You know what's funny? When it first happened, I just wanted to forget it ever existed, but now I think maybe it was supposed to happen. Maybe it was life's way of teaching me patience." Her father nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the lessons we don't want are the ones that shape us the most. Over time, the story that had once been embarrassing became something she could talk about freely, not with bitterness but with wisdom. She didn't see it as a moment of humiliation anymore. She saw it as a turning point. People began inviting her to speak at schools, not because she was famous, but because she was relatable. She didn't use big words or political terms. She just talked about kindness, patience, and understanding. One day, during a visit to a high school, a student asked, "What did it feel like when your dad showed up that night? Were you scared for the officers?" Malia smiled softly. "He wasn't angry," she said. "He was calm, but his calmness said everything. He didn't need to raise his voice to make a point. That night taught me that real power doesn't shout. It speaks quietly, but it makes people listen." The students nodded, clearly moved by her words. When she got home that evening, her dad asked how it went. "It went great," she said. "They really listened." He smiled. "Then you're doing exactly what you're meant to do." As the days turned into months, Malia continued her work quietly. She never forgot that night, but she no longer felt burdened by it. It had become a part of her story, one that taught her resilience, patience, and grace. And though she rarely talked about it publicly anymore, those who knew her could see how much it had shaped her. She carried herself differently now, not out of pride, but out of peace. The world could misunderstand her, criticize her, or even doubt her, but she knew who she was. That was something no one could take away. Months had passed since the ceremony, and life for Malia had settled into a steady rhythm again. The attention from the media had faded, and she was grateful for that. She preferred the quiet now, the kind that allowed her to think, to breathe, and to live without feeling watched. The world kept moving forward as it always did. News cycles changed, people found new things to discuss, and her story became just another memory in the long scroll of the internet. But for Malia, it wasn't just a story. It had been a lesson, one that reshaped the way she saw people, responsibility, and herself. She still volunteered when she could, speaking to students and helping with community projects. But lately, she had begun thinking about doing something more lasting, something that could outlive the headlines. One night, while sitting on the porch of her small apartment, she looked at the city lights and thought about everything she had learned, the way people had stood up for her, the way others had doubted her, and how forgiveness had quietly changed her heart. She picked up her phone and called her dad. "Hey, Dad," she said. "I've been thinking about starting something, a small foundation maybe, for young people, a space where they can learn how to communicate with confidence, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to understand others even when they're different." Her dad's voice was warm on the other end. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. What made you think of it?" She paused for a moment. "Because I think a lot of problems start with fear and misunderstanding. If people learned how to talk to each other and really talk, maybe fewer moments like mine would happen." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's the kind of thinking that changes the world." She smiled. "I'm not trying to change the world, Dad, just maybe make it a little kinder." "Sometimes," he said, "that's the same thing." The following weeks were busy. She met with mentors, educators and local leaders who believed in her idea. They helped her set up the first workshops for the new foundation. She decided to call it the Bridge Project, because as she explained to her friends, bridges connect people who might never meet otherwise. The first event took place in a community-centered gym. The turnout was small, maybe 20 students, but it was enough. She stood at the front, looking at their curious faces, and felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. "Thank you for coming," she began. "This isn't about lectures or rules. It's about learning how to listen, how to understand someone even when you don't agree with them." The students nodded, some taking notes, others just watching her closely. Over the next few hours, they shared stories, practiced open conversations, and even role-played situations where respect was tested. By the end of the session, Malia could feel something shifting, not in the room, but in the people. They were smiling, laughing, listening to each other. It was a small start, but it was real. After the event, one of the volunteers came up to her and said, "You know, this could grow big." "People need this," Malia smiled. "Let's take it one step at a time." But word spread quickly. Within months, other schools and organizations reached out, asking her to bring the Bridge Project to their communities. Malia didn't expect it to grow so fast, but she was grateful. Her father watched quietly as her idea blossomed. One evening during dinner, he said, "You've turned something painful into something powerful. I hope you know how rare that is." Malia looked down at her plate, smiling modestly. "I just didn't want that night to define me." Her father nodded. "It didn't. You defined it." As time passed, Malia started traveling to different cities to host discussions and youth forums. She listened to stories from teenagers who felt misunderstood, from young officers trying to rebuild trust, and from community leaders searching for solutions. Every story reminded her that empathy wasn't about agreeing. It was about understanding. During one event, a high school student stood up and said, "How do you forgive someone who never says sorry?" Malia paused, thinking carefully before she answered. "Forgiveness isn't always about the other person," she said. "It's about freeing yourself from the weight they left on you. It doesn't mean you forget, and it means you stop letting the hurt control you." The room went quiet. The student nodded slowly, and several others whispered to each other, clearly moved. Moments like that reminded Malia why she kept doing this work. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about healing, and hers and others. But success brought new challenges, too. Some people questioned her motives, suggesting she was only successful because of who her father was. Others accused her of being too soft or too idealistic. When those comments reached her, she would take a deep breath and remind herself of something her father once said. "If you spend your time fighting every rumor, you'll never have time to build the truth." So she stayed focused on the work. One afternoon, after hosting a youth event in Washington, she was packing up when a woman approached her. She looked tired but kind, holding the hand of a young boy. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I just wanted to thank you. My son here, he saw your story on the internet a while back. He said you made him feel like staying calm is something strong people do." Malia smiled warmly and crouched down to the boy's level. "Is that true?" she asked. The boy nodded shyly. "I used to get mad when people were mean, but now I just breathe and walk away." Malia laughed softly. "That's a very smart thing to do." The woman smiled with gratitude. "You're helping more people than you realize." After they left, Malia sat quietly for a while, letting the words sink in. That one simple conversation made every difficult moment worth it. Later that week, she shared the story with her dad during a phone call. He listened, his voice full of pride. "See," he said, "that's what leadership looks like. Not being the loudest in the room, but helping others find peace in theirs." Malia smiled. "You always have a way with words, Dad," he laughed. "That's my job." Years went by. The Bridge Project expanded, reaching schools in other states and even different countries. Malia had built something that stood on its own, something that didn't rely on her family name or her past. She was proud, but she never forgot how it all started. One night, one misunderstanding, one moment of humiliation that turned into a lesson about grace. One afternoon, she visited the same city block where the incident had first happened years earlier. The street had changed, new stores, new buildings, new faces. But standing there, she could still remember every detail of that night. This time, though, the memory didn't sting. It felt distant, like an old chapter she'd outgrown. She stood there for a long time, taking it all in. The sound of cars, the chatter of people, the hum of life continuing. A police car passed slowly down the street. The officer inside glanced her way, gave a polite nod, and drove on. It was such a small gesture, but it carried a deep sense of peace. Malia smiled. It felt like the universe had come full circle. When she got home, she found her father sitting on the porch reading. He looked up as she approached. "You went back there, didn't you?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I did. How did it feel?" She thought for a moment. "Different. Not heavy anymore. Just real." He smiled. "That's how you know you've healed." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the evening sky fade into soft pinks and purples. Then her father said, "You know, sometimes life tests us in ways that don't make sense at first. But you turned that test into a message." Malia smiled softly. "I just followed what felt right." "And that," her father said, "is exactly why it worked." As the sun dipped below the horizon, a gentle breeze swept through the yard. Malia leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought about everything. The fear, the confusion, the anger, the peace, and now the quiet sense of purpose that had replaced it all. She realized she didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Her actions had spoken louder than any argument could. That night, before bed, she wrote a short entry in her journal. "Sometimes the moments that break you open are the ones that teach you how strong you really are. Forgiveness is freedom, calm is courage, and understanding, that's where real change begins." She closed the notebook and smiled. It wasn't the end of her story, just another beginning. Months later, her foundation hosted its largest event yet, a National Youth Summit in Washington, D.C. Thousands of young people attended, along with teachers, police officers, and community leaders. The atmosphere was full of hope. When it was time for Malia to speak, she walked onto the stage to warm applause. She looked out at the crowd, so many faces, so much energy, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I want to tell you something I learned the hard way," she began. "When people treat you unfairly, it's easy to think you have to fight back to prove your worth. But the truth is, your worth isn't something anyone can take away. The moment you realize that, you become unshakable." The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. "I was once embarrassed, misunderstood, and made to feel small," she continued. "But I learned that staying calm, forgiving others, and believing in yourself, those are the things that make you strong. That's what turns pain into power." As she finished, the crowd rose to its feet, clapping and cheering. Malia smiled, humbled but proud. She didn't see herself as a hero, just someone who had learned to turn a difficult moment into something meaningful. After the summit, her father came up to her backstage. "You were incredible," he said with a proud smile. She hugged him tightly. "I just spoke from the heart." "That's why people listen," he replied. As the night ended and the lights dimmed, Malia stood by the stage, looking out at the empty chairs. She thought about how far she'd come, from a moment of humiliation on a quiet street to this moment of peace and purpose. She knew there would still be challenges ahead. There always were. But she also knew she had something stronger than fear or anger: clarity. And in that clarity, she had found freedom. As she walked outside into the cool night air, she looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself for teaching her that every storm passes, and every scar can become a story of strength. And with that, Malia smiled and walked forward, calm, confident, and ready for whatever came next.